Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. Last week was of course pretty interesting with a major battle between the Imperium and Test, I think, against NC Coalition, I think that's right, where well around 50 Titans were destroyed, so that is definitely a pretty major battle. I went there and I tried to take some footage, but my client continuously crashed whenever I was recording for like a minute or so. So I got a couple of clips, but really I don't think that I have enough to make a complete video out of it or anything like that. So I think I'll just, become maybe part of Sunday recap or something like that. But very cool battle, of course, and I think I could have stayed there if I had like toned down the graphics or something, but I really wanted to try and get as cinematic footage as possible, and well, just didn't work out. That happens as well, of course. Next to that, there's a new Rooks and Kings video. I thought it was really interesting about their experience on CC, and then even a very nice story where TQ was basically used as a distraction from an operation on no, not CC, but on Singularity, the Chinese server. And very interesting story as well about basically the end game for EVE on the Chinese server, where a single group now dominates the entirety of nullsec. Most of the resistance has gone underground in wormhole space, and that's basically the state of the servers over there, which are also getting a new company. So lots of changes happening there, and yeah, very interesting video in my opinion, especially if you like the higher scales of what's happening in the sandbox of EVE Online, and potentially of what could happen on TQ as well, and what is happening there as well, which I found a very interesting post when the people were comparing it to what the Imperium is doing on TQ. But at the moment their mission statement is to destroy as much as possible from the opponents, but not take over the entirety of nullsec. So they're not planning to take over all possible farms and fields, but they just want to get competition out of the way. They do want to become the dominant power in the universe, which I think they are succeeding at the moment. Their economic output is just so unrivaled that yeah, the Imperium is on track to become the dominant force in EVE Online. What will that bring for the future? Who knows? It's all part of the sandbox experience. With a big battle like that, there might be an impact on the market as well. So let's get started, as always, with some plex and stuff at 255, let's say. Like that. And we'll start with plex themselves, which are dropping back even more on more sales from CCP. So I did not expect them to just keep punching out the sales throughout the summer, but it did happen, and we are at a new one-year low at around 2.7 million for the sellers. Let's also take a look at the player-owned trade hub. So 2,710,000 is for the sellers, and then the buyers are coming in at just below 2.7 million. Another nice opportunity, in my opinion, to grab some cheap plex for, at this point, less than 2.7 million. That is definitely the cheapest we've seen it in an entire year. Does that make the purchases that we could have done at less than 2.8 here bad purchases? No, but it does mean that you always have to keep that in mind. Something that I try to remind you guys of every single EVE Talk. Don't spend all your money on a single buy opportunity. You never know when the next one shows up, and this is exactly what's happening here for plex. So we've had a pretty steady decline now since January, which is definitely quite interesting, but here now a late bottom forming in August, less than 2.7 million. I got an email, sales left and right, lots of sales happening at the moment, and this is really the impact of that. If sales stop, let's say in autumn, then we will probably see plex go way back up, add some hype, maybe a nice patch, maybe an expansion for the winter. I think it would have been announced by now, but who knows what's coming next for EVE Online. A little bit of hype will probably help to turn this around. And I think personally that this is a great time to invest in plex at the moment. Next up, we have the multiple pilot training certificate. We can see that that one climbed up to 1.2 billion ISK, but now a steady decline and a second leg down as well on bigger volumes. pretty obvious that sales are happening here as well, and we are back below 1 billion ISK, it looks like. Yeah, 979 million ISK for the sellers and 923 for the buyers. I think you can pretty easily grab these trade certificates now for around 950 million ISK. If you try and grab that on the chart, it's going to be around here. So definitely a low point there as well. Another buy opportunity, in my opinion, for the multiple parallel trading certificates. Next up, we have the skill extractors, mirroring plex very closely, of course, also coming to a 1-year low. I mean, if you would go back like a year or so for ETH Talk, it was constantly, oh, we're going up, and from time to time you would have some panic threats from people that say that Plex is getting ridiculously expensive, inflation is out of control, it's just impossible to keep your accounts up and things like that. Well, look at what happens now. Since January, we've got a steady decline in the cost of many of these items, which I find absolutely fascinating, with a 1-year low point right now. Skill extractors currently selling for 310 million, a little bit above that. Buyers coming in at less than 300 million ISK as well. Pretty cheap considering the rest of the year here. Let's take a look at the skill injectors next. Here are the large skill injectors continuing their decline as well, reaching a 1-year low. Yeah, this time definitely breaking the starting point of the chart here. 737 million ISK for the sellers, 711 million for the buyers, and I think it's basically on the fresh round of sales from CCP. It's given producers of these skill injectors even more room because of the cheap plex that they can grab now, and we actually see the margin opening up again. The sellers are staying at really cheap prices, relatively speaking, of course, 737, but it's the buyers that are going down now to 711 million, dragging the price down to a new low. The small skill injector is of course doing pretty much the same thing, definitely a 1-year low point here as well, getting close to 150, exactly 150 million, even less than that for the sellers, 142 for the buyers. So grabbing some of these at 145 is definitely possible, and 145 is all the way down here on the chart. It's, in my opinion, a great time to make your investments in this specific category. The one exception, Daily Alpha Injector, is back on its normal price of around 60 million ISK, 60 million for the sellers and 55.5 for the buyers. But all the others, definitely in a very interesting place if you're looking to make those longer term investments that will generally protect you against inflation in the game. That is why I do find Plex injectors very interesting, because these are tied to the real life money, and thus the inflation in the game tends to be absorbed by these items quite efficiently. So if you still need that hedge for inflation, you can definitely start working on that. As always, remember, don't empty your entire wallet into this. Keep a bit of a more balanced approach. I think that's always a good idea. You never know if another major Plex sale happens, like late August or something like that. We might drop to even lower price points, but grabbing some at this point, I think, makes a lot of sense. Next up, let's move on to the minerals. That's coming in at 830. And we'll see. A big war, 50 titans lost. That should have an impact. And here is the titanium chart that has basically continued its straight upward trajectory, heading for 7 ISK at this point. If we go for GTI itself, it's 667. That's still pretty much the same sell price as last week, but the buyers have gone up to 638 as well. So this is a great time for you to unload your titanium if you've been hoarding that. Next up, we got pyrite. Well, this is interesting. Did go up to 4.5 ISK, but already under pressure, so that does show that it is not a bottleneck in any way, and that doesn't look like the mineral market is reeling just yet from the destruction that's happening in the war. 409 now for the sellers, and you can see here almost 1 billion units still coming in, 500 million units here. 402 for the buyers. It's basically 4 ISK for pyrite, which is back towards the lower end of the chart. We broke that before. We're still just above that, but it's definitely not the same revival as what we're seeing with titanium. Let's take a look at Mexilon, that is continuing on the 70 ISK mark. This is the big surprise for me. I thought on all of that destruction in Nalsec that at least some production lines would be ramped up a little bit more and that we would see an increasing price for Mexilon. Not happening. 69 for the sellers, 68 ISK for the buyers. A steady price just below 70 ISK for Mexilon. Isogen, slight bump, really the smallest of bumps here. So almost inconsequential, basically flat at the 1 year low points, 27.75. Pretty much almost 28 ISK for the sellers and 27 ISK for the buyers. Well, super cheap Isogen. There's not much to say here. Extremely cheap. Next up, we've got Noxium. Bit of a revival, managed to get back above 300 ISK. The question is, how long can that be defended? I don't think very long. Here's 310 for the sellers, 294 for the buyers. But that pressure, I think, will come back on. If we had seen Mexilon make a comeback and maybe Pyrite maintain a close to 4.5 ISK, I would have been a bit more optimistic. At this point, I think it's pretty obvious that despite all the action in Nalsec at the moment, minerals are not a problem for the market or for their production lines. There's no need to import massive amounts, except apparently for titanium. That's the one exception. Next up, we still have Zydrine, that is also basically flat at its low point here, 531 for the sellers and 511 for the buyers. We'll see the same pattern for Megasite, even dropping a little bit lower as well. Currently selling for around 600 ISK, buyers at 580. And then we still have Morphite that we could check. That is a nice little bump that is actually maintained above 10,000 ISK. I think it also shows, this story also shows that, well, the meta is not Tech 1, right? You've got Tech 2 when it comes to the subcaps, basically. I think that's what this is mostly showing. 10,333 for the sellers, which is quite a nice price, a respectable price for sure. 9,840 for the buyers. And not that long ago, you could probably have bought this for like 8,500 ISK. You would have made a bit of profit on that trade, but it shows that the action for the raw materials markets from a Nalsec war at the moment seems to be Tech 2 related for the subcaps and titanium uniquely when stuff like supercapitals are lost. Next up, we have PI that comes in at 12.30. Let's take a look at these. I'm not expecting too much action here. We saw that not that long ago broadcast nodes did dip to less than 2 million ISK. Bit of an increased volume for a couple of days. You can see that right here. Made a recovery to above 2.1 million. So 2.2 million for the sellers, 2.1 for the buyers. We're back basically on an average price range. And that buy opportunity has been snuffed out by the market quite effectively, which is the pattern that we can expect. For the people that do look for their longer horizon, these are the opportunities that you do want to grab, because we know that there's more structure related stuff in development at CCP, and that's the gamble, of course. If that also continues the same pattern of needing advanced PI materials, then these are the investments to make, especially on drops like this. But you can also see there's lots of people that follow that same reasoning, and so these opportunities never last very long. Construction blocks, very similar pattern, went down to less than 11,000 ISK, jump back up to 12,000, bit of pressure at the tail end here, but sellers are coming in at 12,200, buyers 11,500, which is right on the average, I would say. Consumer electronics continuing to build on some decent strength here, actually heading for close to at least a 1 year high point, selling for 20,000 ISK, buyers at 15,600. Definitely something that you can sell if you happen to make this, or if you have some stocks lying around, for instance, from a purchase at 12,000 ISK down here. The coolants market continuing its slow ascent, heading for 11,000 ISK. Very interesting, very nice comeback. And this is where the ISK is flowing at the moment, apparently. I think that across the board, there are massive amounts of structures now, whole areas, such as Delft from the Imperium, are being completely industrialized, completely developed by the players, and that means lots of fuel that is being used as well, and as a result these PI materials are actually coming back from their low points. 10,900 for the sellers, 10,000 ISK for the buyers. This is actually an average price that we would have called normal for coolants before the moon mining changes, before all of the POSs for moon mining were basically taken out. And this is that massive dip that you can see related to that. Actually here, this high point was because we had all these POSs still active. We also had all of the new structures that were starting to ask quite a bit of fuel, and we actually went up in price. This 12 to 13,000 ISK at the start of the year was a high price for coolants. Enriched uranium also continuing its slow increase, heading for 12,500 at this point, 12,200 for the sellers, 11,200 for the buyers. Still a healthy margin here, so on a nice dip, I think you can very easily grab some cheaper ones and use that as an investment for trades. But at the moment, it's pretty obvious that the fuel-related PI materials are staging their comeback. The integrity response drones next, basically on a downtrend as well, but continuously bouncing on that 2.5 million mark. Sellers coming in at 2.5, buyers at less than 2.3. So that is not so bad. On this lower graphic, you might be able to grab a couple of integrity response drones for 2.3 million or very close to that. Considering the entire chart, that is definitely not a bad price, but personally I would love to see us break through that 2.5 million barrier on the chart on a 5-day moving average at some point to really have a buy opportunity close to 2 million. That would be a pronounced one where you could really try to grab some nice ISK, some nice margins out of these. This is quite okay on this downtrend here on the chart, but we keep bouncing on that 2.5 million mark. It again shows that the investors for advanced PI materials are keeping a very close eye on all of these markets. The mechanical parts continuing the ascent. This is incredible. During the year here, for a moment we really thought that this was the new normal for mechanical parts, price below 10,000 ISK. Look at that, back at 12,000 ISK here, 12,500 in fact for the sellers, 12,000 for the buyers. Very, very impressive and nice comeback for mechanical parts. This is very easy to produce, barren planets, very common, lots of resources on there in order to create mechanical parts. This is a very nice comeback, coming back towards the start of the year, which is again, in my opinion, higher than average. Even looking back to before the moon mining changes, even to the POS area, this is an above average price for mechanical parts. A very nice sell opportunity right here. In fact, I'm making that on 2 planets, and I still need to make that trip back with my superconductors as well, but this is definitely something that I need to do next week. Nuclear reactors next. Finally going back up. All right, I made an investment on this dip, close to 80k, I think is what I bought my nuclear reactors from. We have 1, 2, 3 months of prices below 100,000 ISK, but finally look at that 5-day moving average climbing back up here. Currently selling for 114,000 ISK, buyers coming in at 97,000 ISK. How much momentum does this have? That's going to be very difficult to determine, but we have a small sell opportunity if you grabbed these bottom prices. But you had several opportunities throughout the month here to do so, and a very nice comeback here for nuclear reactors. Might not be the high point yet, but you're definitely making ISK on the purchases that we made around June. So again, another one for me to look forward to. A successful trade. Very nice. The organic mortar applicators next are basically flat above 1.1 million ISK. You can clearly see that we're not at the low point. 1.2 for the sellers, 1 million. 1.1 million pretty much for the buyers. So again, on the buyer side, it's okay. This is a normal price, an average price, but not a pronounced buy opportunity just yet. The robotics also climbing close to a 1-year high point, 110,000 ISK. That's been a very long time. 110 for the sellers, 105 for the buyers. Back to a slightly above average price for robotics as well. This is related to fuels. It's that definite trend here. Self-harmonizing power cores. Again, it is an advanced PI materials. pretty flat above 2 million ISK, sellers at 2.1, buyers at 2 million. It's not that pronounced buy opportunity again, it's the average price, so that market is staying really quite stable. Superconductors, after reaching 14,000 ISK, are back to a normal 12,000 ISK, so I missed my sell opportunity. 12,500 for the sellers, still slightly above average. It's still definitely an okay price. It's not the sell opportunity we saw last week. 11,700 ISK for the buyers is pretty much normal. Test cultures next, continuing a slow descent to 7,500. Where are the buyers? Lack of buyers, 7,400. Look at these upwards potential trends. 10,000 ISK on a lot of demand all of a sudden. Not bad in my book. I think you could try to grab test cultures here for less than 7,500 ISK. That would be, in my opinion, a pretty good investment. I think most of it will eventually be related to structures. I think this jump up here was together with the refineries being released. So I would say, yep, this cultures looks really interesting if you want to make an investment in PI. And then finally, we've got wet pair mainframes, where the seesaw motion is continuing, slightly under pressure, but again, these were three nice buy opportunities. You probably could have bought them close to 2.1 million, but here at the moment, selling for 2.3 million, bit above that, buyers at 2.2 million. We're still in between the two. So again, an okay price, an average price, and on a little bit of luck. Oops, I hope I didn't make too much noise there. On a little bit of luck with the new structures coming out, costing advanced PI materials, this is still a good investment. But if you want to have that extra bit of mojo, then of course waiting for like a real dip, such as the one that we saw here in broadcast notes, will make you that bit of extra risk. It all depends on what you want to do at this point, but I would not blame people that would at this point be purchasing like across the board. Let's say that you want to invest another 50 million or 100 million in all of these advanced PI materials, and then you just equally divide that across all of them. I still think it's not a bad idea for if you want to take advantage of potential structure related increases. So looking good. If we're looking for that pronounced sell opportunity, there's none right now. Next up, we have the advanced moon materials coming in at 22.15. There we go. And gonna try to, so first we had the carbonites. Let's take a look here at the crystalline carbonites. Slight increase in price. I think that last week we did see that they were quite low, around 155, 1 year low point. So a little bit of a comeback, some volume increases. I wonder if any of you guys are responsible for that, but we're back up to 171 for the sellers, 168 for the buyers. Still not super expensive. You could see 200 as being close to the average, but definitely a departure from that 1 year low point. Next up, we have the Fernite carbide. Same story here. Look at that. 172 was not really a low point, but we are taking off, and all of a sudden at 224 for the sellers, 207 for the buyers. Definitely a very nice and pretty sharp increase in price for these carbides. Next up, we have number 3, the titanium carbides from Caldari. Same story. Look at that. About 2 weeks ago, we should have jumped in on that 1 year low point of around 173. Currently already selling for 210 ISK, buyers coming in at 203. I'm quite surprised by the volatility that we're seeing here. Massive amounts of volumes as well. Which is pretty normal, right? If you could have purchased some of the lower sell orders on this phase, then this volume makes a lot of sense for an investment. And then we've got tungsten carbide, same thing, except that the start is from a slightly above average price of above 225, but also going back up to more than 250 ISK. So all of these carbides here, all of a sudden, carbides, carbonites, these are definitely going up in price. There seems to be more demand. Quite interesting. Next up, we have our metamaterials. So we'll start with the photonic metamaterials. Also going up in price from around average, around 19,000 ISK, but back up to 23,000 ISK almost for the sellers, 22,000 for the buyers. Definitely a nice increase in price that's happening at the moment. Next up, we have the plasmionic metamaterials breaking out quite heavily, heading towards a one-year high point of 30,000 ISK, 27,400 for the sellers, 25,700 for the buyers. Definitely above average at this point, and in fact, very close to the previous peaks. So a sell opportunity on your plasmonic metamaterials. Too bad that we didn't have this category before. We could have really, I think, made a bit of money on this one, because that's quite pronounced here, staying stuck at 20k, and then here currently already selling for 27k. Definitely a trade to be made. And then we have the non-linear metamaterials, also up in price, back above average, not the peak just yet, but selling for 32,500 ISK is definitely a pretty high price for these non-linear metamaterials. And then finally we have the terahertz metamaterials that is actually doing something different, going back down from a pretty high price of 27,000 ISK, currently selling for 24.8, and buyers at 23. Interesting that the terahertz metamaterials, well, actually, no, terahertz metamaterials are going back down in price, but look at the tungsten carbide that they are related to. These were at a high point and make a bit of a comeback, but it's probably the digestion of this dip that is coming through on the terahertz metamaterials. I think that makes sense. But all the others, if you look at these raw materials, come from very close to one-year low points and are now staging their comeback. So all of these are actually jumping up as a result of that, and they come from a different place. So it looks like the Amar-related ones are a bit different, or behaving a bit differently from the three others, which are uniform. Very interesting situation. And as I said, I think it was the plasmionics. Definitely a nice sell opportunity here at the moment. We have the rest of the advanced move materials. Here are the fermionic condensates staying pretty flat at an above average price here. So there's not that much to say, except that it's a great time to sell, I think. Next up, we've got the ferrogel, also stuck at 55,000 ISK at a high point for the chart, so a great time to sell. Next up, we've got the fullerenes showing quite a bit of volatility, dropping down to 1,100 ISK at the moment, 1,200 for the sellers, 1,145 for the buyers. Back to maybe slightly above average price, but not by too much at this point. You could go either way. I think if you want to sell, have the patience for a sell order here. If you want to hold on, considering where we just come from, I definitely wouldn't blame you either. Hypersynaptic fibers slowly edging down towards 15,000 ISK, which is, well, above average, so still a great time to be selling these hypersynaptic fibers. We've got the nanotransmitters, same story, stuck at around 6,000 ISK, which is still a pretty good price looking back at the chart. Phenolic composites, though, continuing to build on its strength, peaking at above 3,000 ISK, 3,100 for the sellers, 3,040 for the buyers. Well above average, great time to be selling phenolic composites apparently. Ceramic fibers also stuck on that high plateau of 600. So for all the others, it does look like we have pretty strong demand at the moment, and a great time to sell well above average. Whereas it's important to note, all of these carbonites are starting to stage a comeback, it seems. Interesting here in the advanced move materials. I do look forward to having more views on this category, so that we can really get to know it, because from the looks of it, potentially there is some really nice trading to be done in this one. Next up, we have our Tech 2 ships coming in at 28.30, let's say. And here we might see some movements, but not the way I want. I'm still looking for buy opportunities in Tech 2 ships. I prefer the small ships, because usually these are a bit higher in volume and more affordable, so you can pretty easily do some Twitch trading on that. But with the war happening at the moment, I personally fear that we won't really see anything like that. In fact, the exact opposite is more likely. A couple of lost fleets would increase the prices. The Ares here is stuck at above 30 million ISK. Volumes are pretty stable and above average, so selling for 30.4 million, buyers coming in at 29 million. Hardly any margin, decent availability. It's definitely not a buy opportunity though. I think that the war is keeping this demand up a little bit and thus the price stable. Normally, these hundreds of ships coming in would drive the price back down, but because of the active war situation, I think that's not happening for that reason. Cerberus next, look at that nice increase in volumes here. All of a sudden, it's still commanding 300 million, is 339 in fact for the sellers, 278 for the buyers. Definitely a pretty wide margin that's opening up here, but we are back up in price on this increased volume. So again, Cerberus, great ship, also used in Nullsec, so you're seeing that impact right here as expected basically. The Claw climbing to above 35 million ISK and starting to have market activities, you know, average prices going up and down here around that range, which is normal. Again, 32.5 for the sellers, 30 million for the buyers. Availability is quite nice, but we can also see that the volumes are up on the activity in Nullsec. So are we going to spot a buy opportunity now? It's unfortunately very unlikely. What you can look towards is, of course, we're seeing that high availability. We are seeing the dozens and hundreds of ships coming in. If the end of the war comes, that's when we might see an overproduction take place and where we might actually grab a buy opportunity. That would be my thinking at the moment if I want to do trading in the Tech 2 market. Here is the Crow, did go below 30 million ISK. I'm not sure if I called it a buy opportunity or maybe a buy opportunity, but look at the impact from the war. Not even on that big volumes, we are back above 35 million. It's 38 for the sellers, 31 for the buyers. If a couple of weeks ago you managed to grab one for less than 30 million, you are having a good trade. But this one always feels a little bit too risky for me still. The Crusader next, same thing, nice jump up to 35 million ISK here, 35 million. Look at the availability, 600 of them coming in. That is quite a lot. And again, you can see that we've got some more consolidated higher or above average volumes coming in the Tech 2 markets. So great time to produce, great time to sell, but not a great time for traders in my opinion if you're looking for bargains. The Heretic, same thing, back above 80 million, which is well above average, 89 in fact for the sellers, 68 for the buyers. That is quite a wide margin, but it is an interdictor, a destroyer, and look at the volumes, very difficult to make the trades in there. The Hound next did go up to more than 40 million ISK. Recovered from that. Look at the daily volumes, they are definitely up by quite a little bit, but we are landing at 33 million ISK here at the moment. Sellers at 35, buyers coming in at less than 30 million by just a touch. But basically, I'm a little bit afraid here that nobody is going to sell to the buyers at the moment. They know there's enough demand out there, so that's always going to be sell orders. That is why the average is so much above the buy orders, and it's going to be very tricky. You can try to grab a slightly cheaper Hound at the moment from the buy orders, but as I've said, it's very unlikely that you'll succeed. Next up, we've got the Ishtar jumping up to 300 million ISK and recovering from that. 269 for the buyers, 251 for the sellers. Actually lower volumes. This feels okay if we could actually break that 250, which we're very close to on the buyers, then maybe the Ishtar could be in an interesting place for a bit of a purchase. Still a bit too early in my book. Manticore next, just basically stuck at 35 million. There's not that much to say. You can again see the increased volumes that are slowly slowing down, but then on the last day here we do have increased volumes again. The Nemesis, after dipping below 30 million, is going back up. So we've got 33 million for the sellers, 28.5 million for the buyers. Availability not that great. And well, volumes all over the place a little bit. This is a tricky one to gauge, so you could have potentially bought some for 27 million, selling for 33. It's a slight trade to be made, but it's still not super obvious to make ISK on that. Pontifex next, very stable at an above average price. It's Command Destroyer, look at the volumes. It's just, you know, not really possible to make trades there. The Purifier still staying above 35 million ISK, and look at where the chart is moving in this range. Very tricky. I need to see a real breakdown to less than 30 million ISK to call it a buy opportunity. We're quite away from that. And then the Raptor, same thing, try to go towards 30 million ISK, but now on the war we actually have increased demand again. Volumes not that pronounced, but we are still selling for almost 35 million ISK, 32.5 for the buyers. Yeah, good time to produce, good time to sell. But as I've said, for the investments, very difficult to find. Saber, interdictors super important in nullsec, so these are of course commanding quite a premium at the moment. 82 million for the sellers, 75 million for the buyers. The volumes here are respectable, but again, I would need to see that chart really dip below its average before I would take any of those gambles. Stiletto next, back up in price, as most of these frigates back up towards 35 million ISK, so 35 almost for the sellers, 31.5 for the buyers. And again here we do have an area of slightly more sustained higher volumes. There is just more demand for Tech 2 stuff at the moment with what's happening in nullsec. Stork also back up from that 75 million ISK. And finally we've got the Taranis. Same story, did go below 30 million ISK. So if you bought at this exact time on a buy order, you probably are able to now sell for 32 million with a bit of profit, but it is very difficult to do so, in my opinion. So the Tech 2 market is really great for producers, and I think that they are taking advantage of that at the moment. If you look at what's happening in the advanced moon materials section there, definitely prices going up as well, which will hopefully translate to more supply, so that at the end of the war we will actually spot a pretty obvious buy opportunity to try and make some trades in Tech 2, but it is very difficult to do so at the moment. Moving on to the Tech 3 market at 35.50. There we go. Oh, and that reminds me, I haven't really thought about any extras today. We'll take a look at that. Normally, I think I would have taken something like advanced moon materials, but I still saw materials out there. We'll see. Let's get started with the Tech 3 destroyers here. First of all, the Confessor. Apparently not too much demand for that at the moment from a nullsec, because that price is flat at 35 million, 36 for the sellers, 33 for the buyers. Availability 240, 92, 73 is definitely quite high, and the buyers coming in at less than 33 million on the chart. It's not the bottom, but it's definitely a pretty low price. So at the moment, while there are slightly increased volumes, the price is not breaking out just yet. Plenty of supply. Hecate, same thing, definitely pretty low at the moment, selling for 36 million, buyers coming in at 34 million, and look at that, 240, 114, plenty of availability. So here, even despite a couple of days of higher volumes, we are pretty flat on the price, and yeah, 34 million for the buyers. It's definitely the lower end of the chart. Next up, we have the Jackdaw, which I sold last week, by the way. On this increase in price, I did take advantage of that because I bought a couple for a very low price. But look at the increased volumes here, all of a sudden dropping the price back down to 40 million. That is quite interesting. 44 million for the sellers, 40 million for the buyers, and the peak was actually at 50 million ISK. So this is actually lots of fresh supply. You can see here 13, 42, 35, all of that is in the last 24 hours. Day before that, there's more coming in, and so we went very quickly from 59 to 50 to 47.5 to 45, and competition has started driving that price down continuously. We can also see that there are hundreds of ships in the Hecate, in the Confessor. So what are you going to produce at the moment? Well, it's Jackdaws, of course. You're gonna plug that gap very quickly and efficiently, I think. The Svepol next did bump up a little bit on an increased volume from 33 to 37 million ISK, but the bad news is that increased supply is already manifesting here to 31 as the latest sell order at 37.5 million. There's not even anyone really willing to compete with this price when you've got Jackdaws that are selling for 44 million at the moment. So that oversupply potential, I think this week once again shows that even when there is an nullsec activity, and sometimes you get some demands from the game, it's just plugged very quickly, very efficiently, and the potential is still out there to bring way more ships to the market than the game needs at the moment for these destroyers. Might be a different story for the cruisers though, because the Legion went down to 150 but is jumping up quite heavily. We also see from the ticker that the Tengu went up 6.5%. So 213 million for the sellers, 160 for the buyers. It does look like the winners. I would have expected maybe some of these destroyers to be used in the current nullsec conflict and to become the winners or potential good trades that way. No, looks like it's actually going to be the Legion for sure. Look at that, increased volumes, increased demand, going up from 150 to more than 200 million ISK. That would have been the gamble to take, which I always felt better about the destroyers, but looks like we should have gone for the cruisers. Loki, also pretty flat, but at 250 million, by far the most expensive one, currently selling for 270. Availability though, man, look at that, that's quite a few Lokis on the market. That one is pretty flat, nothing too major in the volumes, whereas the Legion definitely one of the winners at the moment here. The Proteus also slightly up in price, but nothing too major, selling for 160, bars at 133. But then we do have the Tengu normally, that is up in price as well. Volumes slightly up here as well. So we went to a bottom price of less than 150 and we're currently selling for 165. But look at availability again. Where is all of this coming from? 600, 485, that's more than 1,000 Tengus in 2 sell orders. For the Proteus, we've got 180, 180 here, and it's by far the cheapest one. And if we look at the Loki, we've got 1,000 of them here in 3 sell orders, and then it's the Legion that is basically one out, I think, for nullsec, because that availability is down the drain and that price is way up. So we've got a pretty decent move from the Tengu, but it's pretty obvious in the tech tree market this week that the Legion is the big winner. So I am personally going to assume that we've got some Legion fleets that were in those nullsec systems, duking it out and getting blown up, that needed to be replaced. And I do think, though, that will go back down very quickly now, unless the action ramps up and we've got a couple of big fights again next week. Then I do think that you can clearly see from just the sheer amount of ships that are available in all the other tech tree ships that Legion gap is going to get filled very quickly. And it's the same thing with the Jackdaw that is already being filled right now. You can see the competition coming in, driving the price back down. So yeah, the tech tree market, very interesting, but you do need to know beforehand basically what nullsec is going to use. Looks like it's been the Legion last week, and he's going to need to replace, I should say. Looks like it was the Legion last week, the big winner, but always keep that in mind. Now look at the potential production that exists in the tech tree market. It's way more than we can absorb, and you have to be careful when it comes to making these investments. Which brings us to the extra materials at 4210, and yeah, we'll just do a little bit of looking around maybe for this one. I haven't planned anything. Normally I write something down. I completely forgot this week. It's still super hot here in Belgium. Temperatures above 30 degrees Celsius. We are not used to that. And maybe next week we'll have like a turnaround back down to like 25, which would be far better for me personally. But we'll start with some fuel blocks. I am a little bit curious about these charts as well, and I find this to be massively interesting because you can clearly see the dip here with the moon mining changes, with the bosses for moon mining that went away, had to be replaced by refineries. But you can see the sharp increase in price again on the demand for helium fuel blocks, going back up to 22,000, and basically despite the increased PI prices for the raw materials thus for creating these fuel blocks, we are very stable at 22,000. Availability is quite nice. This is very good in my opinion for POS owners, while this will relatively look like an expensive period because of the higher price compared to those super low PI prices. At the moment, we have a bit of inertia in the price despite increasing prices for the raw materials. We've got the hydrogen fuel blocks that are pretty steady at 24,000, actually dropping back down a little bit, coming from a high point of 25,000. Availability is quite nice once again. Nitrogen fuel blocks, same thing, right? You get that dip here, November, December, January, a pretty sharp recovery, which it took a lot longer for the PI materials to do, and then a steady price at above 21,000 ISK. And then for the oxygen fuel blocks, we actually had an increase in price to more than 23,000 ISK, and we're actually going back down a little bit at the tail end. So this is, in July, you've got a decrease in price for the oxygen fuel blocks from 24,000 to less than 23,000. And in that same time, you've got the coolants that are going up from 10,000 ISK to 11,000 ISK. You've got the mechanical parts that are going up massively as well. So to me, this does look like something really strange in the fuel block department, which, well, I think we're just going to add the ice products as a result. There should be something there. Maybe not, maybe I'm completely wrong, and it's just the massive volumes that are creating this inertia, the availability, but perhaps there is something there. So it's going to be fuels and ice products. Let's take a look at these, and there we go. Here is our answer. For instance, we do have heavy water. Is that used? Well, maybe it's the answer. Let's take a quick look if that's actually used in fuel blocks before I claim to become a guru. Yep, look at that. Heavy water is needed, for instance, in the helium fuel blocks. And this is, of course, the counter to the increased prices for PI. We were actually down to 324 ISK. We're staging a bit of a comeback to 400, but that is basically what has neutralized the increased price from PI. It's the decrease in price to a one-year low point in the heavy water, for instance. Then the isotopes are actually high, up to 1,000 ISK at the moment. But they have been there for quite a while. The hydrogen isotopes are slightly dropping in price. Interesting that they're doing a different thing here again from 1250 and managing to stay there for quite a while. Now selling for 1,000 ISK, and buyers are below 1,000 ISK. We've got a liquid ozone that is at a high point, but pretty steady in the 100 to 110 range for most of the last few months here. Then we get the hydrogen isotopes also steady at a high point. This is, of course, explaining the increase in price for fuels being so sharp all of a sudden when you've got this increase in price in the isotopes from February to March as well. Then we've got the oxygen isotopes, same peak here, slow downtrend back down to less than 1,000 ISK. And then for strontium, that's the bad news. I still have an investment here that's cost me a lot of ISK, and there's just no sell opportunity. Holding on to that, who knows what the future will bring, but that is basically steady at super low prices historically speaking. So very interesting to see this heavy water drop that is now actually coming back. We should have, if we'd seen that like 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, we would have probably made an investment in that, and it looks like that one is up though. So this is what has kept the price of fuel in check, in my opinion. It's this decrease in price because the isotopes are actually at pretty high points, slightly down, but still trading well above average. And so the fact that this is going back up here might mean more expensive fuel prices in the near future, because we've got heavy water coming back, we've got the isotopes trading above average, and we have that big comeback from the PI materials themselves. Very, very interesting. Might need to stock up on the fuel blocks this week rather than next week. And that's going to be it for this IF Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.